Welcome to the Man Cave University, a special series within the Man Cave podcast. This is where sports history comes out of the textbook and into the real world. Because here's the thing, history isn't just dates and stats. It's people, it's moments, it's stories. And some of the most fascinating stories in sports never get told. At Man Cave University, we dig into the forgotten names, the overlooked figures, and the moments that helped shape the game we love. These aren't lectures. This isn't homework. This is storytelling. Every episode is built around one simple idea. I want to tell you a story about someone who mattered, a story about something that changed the game, and a story that deserves more than just a quick mention in a record book. So whether you are a diehard sports fan, a casual listener, or someone who just loves a good story, you're in the right place. Grab a seat, settle in, and welcome to the Man Cave University, where sports history lives, breathes, and comes to life. For as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated by history. I'm the guy who can fall down a documentary rabbit hole on the American Revolution, the Civil War, weird forgotten moments in history, and especially sports history, NFL films, the Packers Hall of Fame. That kind of stuff has always hooked me. In fact, I went to college and somehow combined my two biggest interests. I earned a degree in kinesiology with a minor in history, sports and storytelling coming together. I've always had this goal in the back of my mind. I want to make a documentary. I'm a total sucker for a great documentary. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want to do just another plain, traditional, sit back and watch documentary. I kept asking myself a simple question. How do you make sports history interesting for people who don't consider themselves history buffs? And eventually, it clicked. Keep it short, keep it natural, and most importantly, be a good storyteller. Because let's be honest, history can feel boring to a lot of people. I get it. It's not for everyone, but history matters. And when it's told the right way, it can be incredible. It all comes down to storytelling. There's a quote from author Richard Powers from his novel, The Overstory, that has always stuck with me. He writes, "The best arguments in the world won't change a person's mind. The only thing that can do that is a good story." That quote fits perfectly in the world of sports talk too. When you talk about a player or a game, you don't just list the stats. You tell the story, the full story, and then you let people decide what it means to them. And that's exactly what I want to do with this history series that I'm calling Man Cave University. I want to tell stories about people, places, and moments you may have never heard of. And most importantly, I want to make it fun. So every episode will begin this way. I want to tell you a story. So let's get started. I want to tell you a story about a man whose name you might not recognize, but whose impact on sports history is far bigger than most people realize. I want to tell you a story about Howard Cub Buck. And right now, a lot of you are probably asking the same question. Who is Cub Buck? I'll be honest, when I first heard that name, I didn't know much about him either. I knew he was a former Green Bay Packer and one of Curly Lambeau's first big free agent signings. But that was about it. But over time, I started to learn a little bit more. And then one day, it really hit me. This guy lived a fascinating sports life. Why don't more people know his story? Why don't more Wisconsin sports fans know who Cub Buck was? That's when I realized this was a story that needed to be told. Because in my opinion, and hopefully by the end of this episode, in your opinion too, Cub Buck should be mentioned as one of the most iconic Wisconsin sports figures in state history. His story spans from high school football in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, to playing for the Wisconsin Badgers, to the Green Bay Packers, and even helping start the University of Miami football program. Yeah, that Miami, the U. But before we get to his college and professional football days, we have to start where every good story starts, at the beginning. And this one begins in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Howard Pierce Buck was born on August 7th, 1892 in Eau Claire. His parents were George and Edna Buck. George Alfred Buck was born in 1857 in Orland, Maine, and eventually moved to Eau Claire as a young man. Edna Cornelia Hurd was born in 1860 in Dane County, Wisconsin. The two were married in 1882 and had 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters. One of those sons was Howard. Howard grew up at 461 Summit Avenue in Eau Claire's 3rd Ward. And for a kid who would grow up to be a multi-sport standout, the location couldn't have been better. Just a few blocks away was Driving Park, a massive athletic area with ball fields and a horse track. It was basically an athlete's playground right in his backyard. The park no longer exists today. It was turned into residential lots in the 1920s, but if you look closely, the curve of Roosevelt Avenue still follows the old racetrack. You have to wonder if growing up next to an athletic complex helped shape the path Howard Buck would take. In high school, Buck did everything. He was a class officer. He acted in school plays. He was a writer for the Kodak, the school magazine at the time. And athletically, he starred in baseball, basketball, track and field, and of course, football. During his senior season in 1910, the Kodak described him as the, quote, undisputed all-state center, end quote, a player who had no rival in Wisconsin. They called him the heart of the team, praising his ability to read formations and shut them down. Another write-up described him as, quote, gracefully carrying 193 pounds, end quote, aggressive, fast, shifty, and nearly impossible to get past on defense. They also noted something that really stands out. Buck wasn't chasing individual glory. He was willing to sacrifice for the good of the team. Oh, and he was also the team's kicker. With Buck on the roster, Eau Claire was dominant. They rolled teams like Stillwater, Toma, and Marshfield by massive margins. And during his senior year, Buck wasn't just playing, he was managing the team too. He wrote recaps of the games for the Kodak, including one memorable showdown with lacrosse that ended in a scoreless tie, a game critics called one of the greatest high school contests of the era. When lacrosse refused a rematch, Eau Claire scheduled Oshkosh for state honors. Buck vividly described the trip, fans lining up to see them off, Oshkosh supporters greeting them with signs that read "Whip Eau Claire," and Buck noted that the first thing his teammates noticed in Oshkosh? A large group of pretty girls. Game day came with brutal weather, mud everywhere, and another hard-fought tie. Even so, Buck wrote that critics conceded the victory to Eau Claire. He proudly declared that Eau Claire possessed the finest football team in the Badger State. Buck graduated from Eau Claire High School in 1911 with a resume that would have made any college drool. Strong grades, school plays, 4 letters in football, 3 in baseball, 2 each in basketball and track, class president. His graduation oration was titled "The Part of Athletics in High School." And when asked about his future plans, he said he wanted to be a farmer. But instead, his path led him to Madison in the University of Wisconsin. And that's where the next chapter of this story begins. When Howard Cub Buck arrived in Madison, it didn't take long for people to notice him. This wasn't just another big body on the line. This was a guy who had already carried himself like a leader, tough, smart, and incredibly dependable. Buck lined up at tackle for the Wisconsin Badgers during the 1913, 1914, and 1915 seasons, a stretch where football was still raw, physical, and unforgiving. This was not the game that we know today. No face masks, limited substitutions, and if you were a lineman, you weren't just blocking, you were surviving. Over those 3 seasons, Wisconsin put together an 11-8-2 record. That may not jump off the page by modern standards, but in the early 1900s, every win was earned the hard way. Games were trench wars, and linemen like Buck were at the center of everything, controlling the line of scrimmage, absorbing punishment, and setting the tone. And Buck didn't just play, he led. By the time the 1915 season rolled around, his teammates and coaches recognized what he meant to the program. Buck was named captain of the Wisconsin Badger football team. Think about that for a moment. In an era when captains were more than ceremonial, Buck was the emotional and physical anchor of the team. He was responsible for discipline, effort, and toughness. When things got rough, and they always did, players looked up to him. And that 1915 2015 season turned into something special. Cub Buck was so dominant on the field that his reputation extended far beyond Madison. Sports writers across the country took notice. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't chasing headlines, he was simply overpowering, smart, and relentless. By the end of the season, Buck was named a two-time All-American, and in 1915, he earned consensus first-team All-American honors, the highest individual recognition a college football player could receive at the time. He was selected by some of the most respected voices in the sport, the Newspaper Enterprise Association, Walter Eckersall, one of the most influential football writers of the era, and the International News Service. He was also chosen in 1915 as a second-team tackle on Walter Camp's prestigious All-America team. In the early 1900s, these lists mattered. They were how greatness was measured, and Cub Buck was universally recognized as one of the best football players in the entire country. From a kid growing up near an old racetrack in Eau Claire, to captain of the Wisconsin Badgers, to a consensus All-American. This wasn't just a successful college career. This was the moment Cub Buck officially stepped onto the national stage, and it set the foundation for everything that would come next. And as it turns out, his football journey was only just getting started. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin, Cub Buck didn't slow down at all. In fact, he barely took a breath. In 1916, Buck stayed in Madison as an assistant football coach at Wisconsin, helping teach the next wave of Badgers. But while he was coaching during the week and on Saturdays, something else was happening behind the scenes, something his parents definitely did not approve of. Buck had started playing professional football. At the time, that was controversial. Very controversial. Professional football didn't carry the respect it has today, and playing on Sundays was frowned upon by a lot of families. Buck's parents were firmly against it. So Buck did what a lot of players quietly did back then. He played under an assumed name. When he suited up for the Canton Bulldogs, one of the powerhouse teams of the era, he didn't go by Howard Buck. He went by Moriarty. During the week, he was Coach Buck in Madison. On Saturdays, he was on the Wisconsin sideline. And then, almost like something out of a movie, he would hop on a train and travel to wherever the Bulldogs were playing that Sunday. 2 lives, 2 identities, 1 tough football player. And not just any football team either. The Canton Bulldogs were loaded, and one of Buck's teammates was a man named Jim Thorpe. Yeah, that Jim Thorpe. By 1917, at just 25 years old, Buck was already being trusted with something massive. He was hired as the head football coach and athletic director at Carleton College. Think about that for a moment. 25 years old, running an entire athletic department, leading young men during one of the most chaotic periods in American history. World War I was raging overseas, and in 1918, the influenza pandemic swept through the country. Games were canceled, seasons were disrupted, travel was difficult, nothing about coaching was normal. And yet, through all of that, Buck kept things steady. Over 3 seasons at Carleton, his teams posted a 10-7 record, a strong showing considering the circumstances. He wasn't just coaching football, he was managing uncertainty, fear, and constant change. But even while serving as head coach and athletic director, Buck still wasn't done playing. He continued suiting up for the Canton Bulldogs alongside Jim Thorpe through 1920, the very first season of the American Professional Football Association, the league that would soon become the NFL. And here's where things get really interesting. Jim Thorpe, one of the greatest athletes the world has ever seen, once said that Cub Buck was the greatest lineman he had ever played with or against. That's not a throwaway compliment. That's Jim Thorpe. In 1920, Buck even squeezed in 1 extra game by playing in the final game of the Green Bay Packers season. And the next year, everything changed. In 1921, the Green Bay Packers officially joined the fledgling professional league that would become the National Football League. Curly Lambeau knew exactly what he was doing when he made Cub Buck a priority. Buck became the first Green Bay Packer with a guaranteed salary, $75 per game. That may not sound like much today, but back then, it was a statement. Lambeau was saying, "This guy matters." Buck had also agreed to coach the team's line. That same season also featured something else historic, the first ever Green Bay-Chicago game. And fittingly, it didn't take long for that rivalry to turn nasty. During the game, Chicago's John Tarzan Taylor took a cheap shot at Buck, slugging him and breaking his nose. The first cheap shot in one of the greatest rivalries in sports history. You know, some things never change. Buck played for the Packers through the 1925 season, doing far more than just lining up on the offensive and defensive lines. He was also the team's punter and place kicker. From 1922 to 1925, Buck made 24 of 35 extra points and was 10 of 28 in field goals, scoring 54 total points. Impressive numbers in an era when scoring was hard to come by. In fact, check this out. He led the Packers in scoring in 1923 and in 1924. He even threw a touchdown pass because why not? Cub Buck could do a little bit of everything. And somehow, he still found time to coach. While playing in Green Bay, Buck also coached the Lawrence Vikings, primarily as an assistant, though he stepped in as head coach for the 1923 season. On top of that, he served as executive director of the Boy Scouts in Appleton. In fact, a quick side note about Buck, in 1922, Indiana University announced it had hired Buck as its head football coach at what was then a handsome $3,000 salary. But Buck changed his mind and remained with the Packers. Player, coach, administrator, leader. By the mid-1920s, Cub Buck wasn't just part of football history, he was shaping it. And amazingly enough, his story still wasn't finished. By 1926, Cub Buck had already lived several football lives. He had been a star high school athlete, a Wisconsin Badger captain and All-American, a pro football pioneer, a Green Bay Packer, a coach, administrator, and leader. And then he did something that would quietly change college football forever. In 1926, Buck became the first head coach in the history of the University of Miami football program. Yeah, that Miami. But before the Hurricanes ever took the field, the chaos started. As the program was being built from scratch, Miami was also building a stadium. And just weeks before the team was supposed to play its very first game, disaster struck. A hurricane tore through South Florida. The storm destroyed the under-construction stadium, ripped apart infrastructure, and forced the university to postpone the start of the football season. For a brand new program that hadn't played a single snap yet, it was an almost unbelievable setback. The Hurricanes had no stadium, no history, no identity, and no margin for error, so Buck adapted. With no varsity team ready to go, Buck's first Miami squad wasn't made up of seasoned college players. It was a freshman team, and somehow that team went 8-0. They didn't just win, they dominated. And two of those victories came against the University of Havana. One game played in Miami and one played in Havana, Cuba. Let that sink in for a moment. In the 1920s, Cub Buck took a college football team out of the country and won. That undefeated freshman team laid the foundation for everything Miami football would become: toughness, adaptability, and a little bit of swagger. Once the Hurricanes officially moved up to varsity competition, reality hit hard. Miami was still a young program, still finding its footing, and still competing against more established teams. In 1927, Miami finished 3-6-1. In 1928, they improved to 4-4-1. Not eye-popping records, but for a program literally starting from nothing, they mattered. Buck wasn't building a powerhouse overnight. He was building roots. And in 1929, after helping launch the program and guide it through its earliest years, Buck stepped away from coaching football. But football didn't step away from him. Even after leaving the sidelines, Buck remained completely plugged into the game. During the football season, he would often attend 3 games in a single weekend, bouncing from one stadium to another, still absorbing the sport he loved. Eventually, Buck made another life change. He moved to Rock Island, Illinois, where he opened a car dealership, trading playbooks and game plans for sales floors and service bays. And in June of 1966, Buck would pass away in a nursing home in Davenport, Iowa. When you step back and really look at the full scope of Howard Cub Buck's life, it becomes clear that he wasn't just a football player or a coach or a name buried in the record books. Cub Buck was a bridge. He was a bridge between eras, between amateur football and professional football, between the Midwest roots of the game and its national expansion, between rough, unstructured beginnings and the organized sport we recognize today. Think about where his fingerprints are. He helped define high school football's excellence in Wisconsin at a time when the sport was still carving out its place in American culture. He then carried that toughness and leadership to the University of Wisconsin, where he wasn't just an All-American, he was a captain, a tone setter, and a standard. At the professional level, Buck was there at the ground floor. He played for the Canton Bulldogs alongside Jim Thorpe during the birth of what would become the NFL. And when one of the greatest athletes of the 20th century calls you the best lineman he ever faced or played with, that's not just praise, that's validation. Buck also symbolizes the sacrifice and grit of early professional players. He played under an assumed name. He traveled overnight by train to play Sunday games. He coached during the week and suited up on the weekends. There were no million-dollar contracts, no endorsement deals, no safety nets, just a love of the game and a willingness to endure. Then there's Green Bay. Buck wasn't just a Packer. He was Curly Lambeau's first true investment, the first Packer with a guaranteed salary, a player trusted to anchor both sides of the line, handle kicking duties, score points, throw a touchdown pass, and help legitimize a small-town franchise that had no business surviving. And yet, it did, because of players like Buck. And then, maybe most remarkably, he helped give birth to an entirely new football identity in the South. Buck was the first head coach in the history of the University of Miami football program. Before championships, before swagger, before the U became a brand. When the stadium didn't exist, when hurricanes wiped out plans, when the team was made up of freshmen and played games in Havana, Cuba. That alone should secure his place in football history. But what truly makes Cub Buck special is not just where he was, it's how often he showed up at the beginning of something important. The beginnings of Wisconsin football greatness, the beginnings of professional football, the beginnings of the Green Bay Packers as a legitimate franchise, the beginnings of Miami Hurricanes football. Very few people can say that, and maybe that's why his name isn't as famous as the others. Cub Buck wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't building a brand. He wasn't trying to be remembered. He was doing the work. He was teaching. He was leading. He was setting standards. And once those standards were in place, he moved on to the next challenge. History often remembers the loudest voices and the flashiest stars, but the game of football was built by people like Cub Buck, tough, adaptable, selfless figures who laid foundations others would later stand on. So when we talk about football history, real football history, Cub Buck isn't a footnote. He's a cornerstone, and that's why his story matters. That's why he belongs in the conversation, and that's why here at the Man Cave University, his story deserved to be told.